Okay, now we've got the basics set up. What we'll do is we'll just add some seed users into our application, so a few users that we can work with. And what we'll do, we'll just head over to our seed.cs class. And inside here, what we're going to do, we're going to add an extra parameter to this. And what we're going to add is something that we get from ASP.NET Identity. And we get a user manager from there. So we'll say user manager, and this takes the app user as a type, and we'll call it user manager. And we'll also need to bring in, using ASP.NET Core, identity here. And what we'll do inside the top of this particular method, we'll just check our user manager to see if there are any users already in our database. So, and if there are, then we just want to not try and add these users again. So we'll add the exclamation mark and we'll say user manager.users, as we have access to this via our user manager, and in our database will be a table of users, and we can say any. And if there are no users, then we're going to execute the logic here. So what we'll do is we'll build a list of users. So we'll say var users equals a new list of type app user. And inside here, we'll say new app user. And we'll just give each user the minimum amount of information we want. So we'll have a display name. So we'll open up curly brackets to initialize these properties. And we'll say the first user, the display name equals Bob. We'll say the username equals Bob lowercase, and we'll say the email is equal to bob@test.com. And we'll add a comma and just copy this line down 2 more times. We'll add a second user called Tom, and say tom@test.com, and we'll add a third user called Jane, and say username Jane, and the email will be jane@test.com. And then what we can do is say for each user in users, and then we can say await, and we can make use of our user manager. And the user manager comes with a whole bunch of different methods that we can take advantage of in our application, a huge amount of different methods. But what we're going to use is the create async method, which allows us to create a user. And this takes a app user parameter, and it can also take a password as well in the second overload. So we can supply the app user object we just created and the password that we want to use with this user. So we'll specify the user, and then we'll just hard code in a password. Now, bear in mind the complexity requirements that I mentioned earlier with the password. So as long as it's got a number, an uppercase, a lowercase letter, and it's at least 6 characters, that's okay for a password. But I'm just going to go for the normal training password I use, which is capital P, a $W, and then that would normally be 0 RD, which meets the complexity requirements. And let's just tidy this up. We need a semicolon there. And we don't need to actually save changes into the database here. When we use this is going to create the specified user in the backing store with the given password as an async operation. So it's going to create this in the database directly. It's going to do the work to create the user and save it in the database, and we don't need to separately save changes. This is all going to be taken care of in this single method here. So what we need to do next is go to our program class, because we need to also pass down the user manager to our seed data method. And what we'll do is we'll say var user manager equals services, and we'll say get required service, and we'll pass in user manager, and we need to specify the app user as a type there as well. And let's just go ahead and bring in ASP.NET Core identity. And we also need the domain here as well. And then as our second parameter here, we can pass down the user manager. And now we're good to restart our application, and what should happen is we're going to migrate or run our migration. So it's going to update our database with all of the identity tables, and it's also going to seed some users into our database. So what we'll do, we'll just open up the terminal window, and all we need to do is cd into the API and say .NET watch run, and press return. Now we should see some activity going on with our identity table now, and we can see that we've got some user related information in that query there, and we don't see any errors, or at least I don't. So I'm confident this has worked, and what we should be able to do if we open up the SQLite database, so I'll say SQLite and open database and choose the reactivities DB, and we'll head over to Solution Explorer and take a look at the reactivities DB now. We can see all of the additional tables that have been created, and the one we're interested in is the ASP.NET users table. And if I right click and show table, then we can see that we have our 3 users added into our database here, Bob, Tom, and Jane. And we can see all of the information added there, including things like the password hash, security stamp, concurrency stamp, and this all looks very good to me. So now that we have some users in our database, our next task is to work out how we can actually log in as one of these users and authenticate ourselves with our application. So next we'll take a look at logging in the users.